Is Little Sarasota Bay the least healthy water body? It depends upon the time of the year and the event. So, for example, after Hurricane Ian, Little Sarasota Bay was the least healthy part of Sarasota Bay because there was so much freshwater inflow that it actually trapped salt water underneath it and caused problems with oxygen. So, after Ian, Little Sarasota Bay was the least healthy part of Sarasota Bay. But in contrast, in 2018, when we had the red tide, Little Sarasota Bay had the lowest amount of red tide organisms because it's far away from the passes. So it kind of depends upon the year and it depends upon the event. Little Sarasota Bay is also healthier water quality now than it's had any time in the last 5 to 15 years, although that's a low bar because 5 to 15 years ago, actually conditions haven't been that great for the most part.
How long does it take for a red tide to form? It's a very good question, and it is one that can't be answered directly and definitively. A red tide will form based on primarily oceanographic conditions. That means tides, currents, waves. What happens is that red tides form offshore. These currents and tides bring them into shore, concentrating the cells. At that point, when the cell concentration is high enough, usually over 1 million cells per liter, it will generate what we call a red tide with the detrimental effects of killing fish and other respiratory problems for people on the beaches. This usually takes, again, it's rough estimate, about a month for the initiation of a red tide. Once it gets into the bay, then because we're trying to manage our nutrients, we don't cause red tides, but we do have the potential to make them worse, longer, more intense, and more serious. So in summary, it takes about a month or so for a red tide typically to form. Is there red tide in Sarasota Bay? Well, fortunately, we have enough information from our state marine laboratory in St. Petersburg, as well as Mote Marine Laboratory, to keep an eye on and monitor red tide. The latest results as of today, which is mid to early January, we have red tide present in our waters, in our nearshore waters. There may be some red tide in the bay, but at this point, we've seen very minimal effects, such as fish kills occurring. That could very well change within the next couple of days. So it really depends on a day-to-day basis as to the status of red tide in the bay.
What is the best thing you can do to help water quality in your area? Well, there's a lot that you can do, and you can start in your home or your yard. When you look at your lawn, are you over-fertilizing? Are you fertilizing correctly? Are you using native plants? Are you rerouting your spout and putting your gutter into your lawn and not your driveway? And if you want to look at things you can do in your community, you can get involved with us, our restoration projects, our educational opportunities. You can spread the word or simply just enjoy the bay and grow your appreciation for it. I'm new to Sarasota. How can I get involved with the Sarasota Bay Estuary Program? Well, we're excited you want to get involved, and there's many opportunities to join us. First, you can engage with us online or digitally through our social media, learn more on our website, has a ton of information. Or you can come out and meet us and join us for one of our restoration events or our kayaking tours, educational programs, or events. There's a ton that you can do to learn about the bay, enjoy the bay, and get involved with SBEP.
How many oysters are in Sarasota Bay? How many stars are in the sky? How many grains of sand are on the beach? We really don't know. But we do have folks from Sarasota County, staff for the Stormwater Division, who have been out on the bay and have monitored the acreage of oysters within the bay. So we measure oysters and how well they're doing and how many we have by looking at the coverage that oysters have within the bay habitats. And from those results of that study, which was done in 2016, we can estimate that there are about 50 acres of oysters that are found in the bay in Sarasota County waters. The Sarasota Bay Estuary Program recognizes that the oysters in Sarasota Bay are relatively healthy, but we have had opportunities to increase the oyster coverage in the bay by actually building and constructing oyster reefs. To date, we have constructed about 10 acres of oyster reefs throughout the Sarasota Bay Estuary, with our intention of building 10 more additional acres of oysters in the next 5 years.
So, are we monitoring the water quality in areas where they have a lot of stormwater? And the answer is yes, we are. We're monitoring it because stormwater is the number one type of pollutant, the way that pollutants are delivered to Sarasota Bay. So, they're monitored. Not every outfall, but our creeks are monitored, for example, on a regular basis, as is the bay. So, we have an idea of the pollutant loads generated, and we also have an idea of what their impacts are both in the creeks and in the bay itself. So they are being monitored because they are important. It's an important part of our pollutant loads to the bay. Some of the things we can do to address the problems that we have with stormwater pollution are things you can do individually with your own property, with your own lifestyle. And that is, if you have a house with gutters, then take your gutters and your downspouts and put them onto the grass. Don't put them onto like the driveway. And you can reduce your over-fertilization of your lawn. It doesn't say don't fertilize your lawn, don't over-fertilize your lawn. Make sure you don't blow grass clippings out into the bay, or if you don't live next to the bay, make sure you don't just blow them into a storm drain. Do your part with like picking up after your pet waste. So there's all sorts of little things that people can do to help reduce their own personal nutrient pollution footprint. So how is the health of the bay after Hurricane Ian? That's a great question. One of the things that we did as soon as Ian made contact with the bay is we got together a group of people to try to figure out how we're going to monitor the health of the bay. So we were out there sampling water quality with our partners within a week after the hurricane made landfall. And what we found is there was so much freshwater inflow that it created this lens of freshwater on top of the saltier water underneath. The top water was full of bacteria from all the decomposing vegetation and dog poop and grass clippings. The bottom water didn't have much oxygen, so we had high bacteria, low oxygen, high nutrients. We had algal blooms, and that persisted for at least 2 weeks in the lower part of the bay from Siesta Key Drive down to Venice Inlet. But by the time 4 weeks had gone by, our water quality was pretty much back to what it was before the storm. So somewhere between 2 and 4 weeks, the water quality of the bay started to get better. Unfortunately, one of the ways it got better was it moved that pulse of polluted stormwater out to the Gulf of Mexico, which seems to have been associated with making an existing red tide a much worse red tide, because that's the kind of thing that happens. We don't cause red tides, we cause them to be worse, and the post-Ian movement of that polluted water out through the passes looks like it made that red tide worse than it would have been otherwise. If you want more information, visit our website, sarasotobay.org, and go into news, and there's updates about the bay, and we have a whole blog post about the impacts of Hurricane Ian, what it did to us, and how long it took to recover.
Is anyone doing anything to plant mangroves along shorelines in Sarasota County or Sarasota Bay? That's a good question. The Sarasota Bay Estuary Program has done quite a bit of estuarine, saltwater, wetland restoration along shorelines throughout the estuary. And what we have found is that when we build these projects, the first thing that we do along the shoreline to stabilize it is to plant salt marsh grasses. They do a very good job in stabilizing the sediments as the project starts to grow. We have found that time after time, almost 100% of the time, mangroves, particularly red mangroves and black mangroves, will recruit to those shorelines naturally. So even though there are many people interested in helping us by planting mangroves, we have found that that is not necessary, and that mangroves will recruit by themselves. How is the status and trends of mangroves in our system? We have found that the mangroves have been, we have found that mangrove coverage throughout the bay has been stable over the past couple of decades. The only time that we have seen a loss of mangroves is through coastal development, where they are removed for some type of project. That practice is no longer allowed, and so we are glad to see that. And now now that we can be comfortable in the fact that the mangroves are doing quite well around our estuary.
So our current climate mitigation practices are based upon us, first off, allowing the community to understand the implications the next couple of decades. Our air temperatures are increasing. The number of days with freezing temperatures has decreased about 90% in the last decade compared to the prior century. Our August days are starting off in the 70s. They used to start off in the 60s. So our air is getting warmer. Our water appears to be getting warmer. Our water level has increased the last 20 years at a rate 3 times the period of record. So it's getting warmer. The water is getting higher. And that has implications for what we do for our restoration projects. So, for example, when we do a restoration project, we make sure that we account for what sea level rise will be in the next couple of decades. So we don't just build a restoration site for what it is now. We allow it to have the sort of features that allow mangroves, for example, to creep upslope during expected rates of sea level rise. But there's an awful lot more that needs to be done, not only habitat restoration, but things like stormwater runoff. More and more of our stormwater drains are going to be underwater when it rains, particularly on new moons and full moons, what we call spring tides. So one of the things that we actually have to worry about as well is, are we going to be driving around on flooded roads because the storm drains aren't functioning because the water is now covering the top of the storm drain? So that's a big issue for us to work through as a community.